As the years passed, Tia held on to her memories of Sugar Boy like precious jewels hidden in the corners of her mind. His laughter echoed in her thoughts. His touch lingered like a whisper on her skin, and she felt his presence in the quiet moments of dawn where the light broke through her window, just as he used to in her life. Friends and family had tried to introduce her to new love, but each man only made her miss Sugar Boy more, reminded her of all he was and all they had shared. One late night, as rain tapped on her window and her heart felt especially heavy, Tia stumbled upon a dusty, forgotten box in her attic. Inside were old letters, scribbled notes, and photos of their time together. She spent hours reading his words, the ink smudged in places from where she had cried over them before. In every line, she found traces of his love and the promises they had made. Each letter seemed like a message from the past, urging her to keep living, to find happiness. But that happiness felt like a betrayal. How could she move on when his memory felt so alive, so close? And yet, in her heart, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a way to honor his memory without closing herself off. Perhaps he wouldn't want her to live forever in a shadow. Tia's grief had twisted into something darker, a storm of anger that she carried like armor. Any mention of Sugar Boy's name sparked a fire in her chest, a painful reminder of what she'd lost, of the happiness that had been snatched from her grasp. Friends who had once been sympathetic grew cautious, avoiding his name as if it were a curse that would unleash her fury. They only wanted to celebrate his memory, to share the stories and laughter he'd brought into their lives. But for Tia, each word felt like salt in a wound that refused to heal. She couldn't understand it herself. How could such beautiful memories hurt so much? How could the love of her life leave behind so much anger, a churning sea of emotions that wouldn't let her breathe? She wanted to cherish his memory, to let it soothe her, but instead it burned. So she stayed quiet, retreating further into herself, where no one could speak his name or remind her of the happiness they'd once shared. But the silence was suffocating. Late at night, when her guard was down and the anger subsided into raw sorrow, she whispered his name into the darkness, hoping somehow he'd hear it, hoping he'd forgive her for the rage she couldn't let go. And each time, she could almost feel him there, waiting for her to find her way back to peace. A decade had transformed Tia into a force of nature. The grief and anger that had once weighed her down now fueled her ambition, pushing her into a life she'd never imagined. She'd left the pain of the past behind in search of something bigger, and Raleigh had become her kingdom. In the underworld of North Carolina, her name carried power and respect, an untouchable reputation she'd built through careful strategy and unwavering control. The exotic strains of marijuana she imported and cultivated had made her an empire. Her product was renowned for its quality, sought after by connoisseurs from Raleigh to the farthest reaches of the state. At 85% market control, Tia's influence was undeniable. She was responsible for more than just a trade. She'd shaped a culture. Her clients, from socialites to hustlers, knew they were in the hands of a true mastermind. But while the success and notoriety filled the void for a while, there were still nights when she'd glance over the Raleigh skyline, a glass of wine in hand, and feel the faint ache of her past. In those quiet moments, her mind would drift back to Sugar Boy. She would wonder what he would think of the woman she'd become. Powerful, cunning, untouchable. Would he have recognized her, or would he have mourned the innocence she had lost? Tia brushed the thoughts aside, choosing instead to focus on the empire she'd built and the life she controlled. She had carved out a new identity, a new destiny, and while her love for Sugar Boy would always be locked away in a guarded place within her, she'd finally learned how to live without the pain. Raleigh was hers now, and she was unstoppable. Tia knew that if Sugar Boy were alive, he'd never have approved of the path she'd chosen. He had always been about respect and integrity, grounded in a sense of loyalty and honesty that had drawn her to him in the first place. But his absence had left a void so deep that she'd done whatever it took to fill it, channeling her mourning into an unbreakable drive that set her apart from anyone in the business. She'd crafted a reputation that no one dared challenge, a woman with both brains and brawn, impossible to intimidate and unyielding in her ambitions. Some nights, when the city was quiet and her empire seemed almost surreal, Tia would feel a pang of guilt, wondering if she'd betrayed his memory by becoming the person she was now. Yet, a part of her believed that the force she'd built was born of the love they'd shared. Her empire wasn't just about the power or the wealth, it was her armor against the world, a way to survive in the face of loss and carve a legacy that no one could take from her. She took the pain of his absence, twisted it into something fierce and unyielding, and let it push her forward. No one knew the full story. To everyone else, Tia was simply a powerhouse, a queen who had single-handedly taken over North Carolina's most lucrative trade, untouchable in her calculated success. But in her heart, she knew that every risk, every conquest, every inch of power she claimed was driven by the memory of the man she'd lost. And though she couldn't bring him back, she'd built a world he'd never be able to forget. Tia was a ghost in the elite underground circles of North Carolina, a whisper, a presence that few could confirm, but everyone felt. She maneuvered with an effortless grace, her reputation shrouded in mystery, known only to those who mattered. Behind the scenes, she had connections in every corner of the underworld. Need something imported quietly? Tia knew the right hands to grease. Looking for a high-profile figure's silence? Tia could arrange it with a single call. Her network extended beyond the marijuana trade, dipping into areas few dared to tread, with key allies from every walk of life. Her secrecy was her greatest asset. She didn't need flashy displays or public validation. Her influence was woven into the fabric of the city's power players. Lawyers, politicians, nightclub owners, and tech gurus all were within her web, and each one owed her something. The favors she traded kept her business untouchable, her name rarely spoken outside of whispers. She moved in the shadows, but her reach was undeniable. In her inner circle, Tia commanded respect, admired for her intellect and feared for her unwavering control. Few dared cross her, knowing the repercussions could ripple through every layer of the city. And yet, despite her power, Tia remained somewhat of an enigma, even to those closest to her. She was as much a myth as she was a woman, a name spoken with reverence, curiosity, and the faintest hint of fear. Tia's unassuming nature was her greatest weapon. She moved like a shadow, blending seamlessly into everyday life, never flaunting her power, which only amplified her influence. She wasn't loud or brash. Instead, she was calm, composed, and down to earth, a quiet storm that took people off guard. This disarming quality allowed her to keep some of North Carolina's most feared figures, like Starling, in check. Even the most treacherous gangsters respected her, understanding that beneath her gentle demeanor lay a mind that could unravel their empires with a single, well-placed move. Starling, a kingpin infamous for his ruthlessness, was one of the few who fully understood the extent of Tia's control. He'd tried to test her once, challenging her authority with an attempt to expand his own territory. But Tia had responded with a subtle yet devastating maneuver, pulling strings he didn't even know existed. Key suppliers suddenly cut ties, his trusted allies turned cold, and law enforcement seemed to close in with uncanny timing. Within days, Starling had been forced to fall back, realizing she held his empire in the palm of her hand. He had no choice but to respect her terms, understanding that Tia's power didn't come from brute strength or intimidation, but from a strategic brilliance that made her untouchable. To everyone around her, Tia was the quiet queen, unshakable, respected, and effortlessly in control. She could make the most hardened gangsters bow, not through fear, but through an unbreakable respect for her insight, influence, and seemingly limitless network. In her own unassuming way, Tia ruled not just with power, but with respect, commanding the loyalty and obedience of the city's most formidable players. To those who knew of her, Tia was more than a queen. She was the queen of queens, a presence that held something almost divine. When people stood in her presence, they felt it: the quiet strength, the refined power, and an aura that went beyond simple authority. She moved with the grace of a goddess, a woman whose confidence and control commanded a respect that transcended fear. Even Starling, with all his bravado, recognized that in her presence he was a king only because she allowed him to be. Over the years, their relationship had evolved into a kind of mutual, distant respect. They had a unique understanding of one another, a bond forged not by friendship but by necessity, mutual survival, and a shared mastery of their underground empires. They were close, yet distant, united by their shared burdens and the constant need to navigate the treacherous waters of the drug trade. Their conversations became rare, reserved only for emergencies or vital intelligence exchanges about rival movements, possible informants, or police activities that could threaten either of their operations. In a way, their minimal contact kept things safe and stable. They both knew that a close alliance could draw unwanted attention, so they kept things strictly professional. When they did speak, each word was weighed, carefully chosen, and layered with meaning. Tia trusted Starling to be as calculated as she was, and he, in turn, valued her insight, knowing her moves could make or break him. Together, they operated as silent guardians of their territories, each an independent force, but with an unspoken alliance that ensured their mutual dominance in the underground. The night Tia made her mark was a blur of flashing lights, broken glass, and blood-soaked adrenaline. She hadn't come looking for trouble, but trouble found her. And when those four women tried to jump her, she was ready to fight with every ounce of fury she had. The first crack of the bottle over the girl's head sent shockwaves through the club, and Tia's instinct kicked in without a second thought. Slitting the throat of another left two standing, but it was enough to turn her into an instant legend in the chaos of that Atlanta night. Starling watched from across the room, intrigued by the sheer ferocity of this Carolina girl who held her ground with the precision and fearlessness of a seasoned street fighter. When he learned she was from North Carolina, he knew there was something special about her, something that could be molded into an ally in his own line of work. But that night wasn't over yet. The remaining two women had retreated, their eyes burning with the promise of revenge as they challenged Tia to finish the fight outside. Blood trickled down the side of her face, staining her lace front as she steadied herself, ignoring the chaos around her. Security rushed into the room, adding to the stampede as the crowd frantically pushed toward the exit, desperate to escape the unfolding violence. In the midst of the chaos, Tia found herself pressed against Starling and his crew as they moved toward the exit. Sizing her up quickly, Starling slipped a pistol into her hand without a word, his silent approval cementing an understanding between them. This was a test, and Tia didn't hesitate. Outside, as the crowd scattered, she raised the gun, her vision zeroed in on the two women. With ruthless precision, she emptied the clip in their direction, her shots ripping through the night. The crowd screamed, people diving for cover as Tia's cold focus drove each bullet forward, her actions etching her name into the city's memory. When the smoke cleared and the echoes of gunfire faded, Tia stood unfazed, a Carolina legend forged in the brutal fires of that Atlanta club. Starling had seen all he needed. From that moment on, he knew he had to keep Tia close. She wasn't just fearless, she was someone who could command respect and bring terror to those who crossed her path. When Tia heard about Starling and his crew being taken down by the feds, she felt a pang of something like sorrow. She knew, deep down, that a life sentence was looming over him. In the game they played, there were only a few endings, and Starling was caught in one of the worst. Despite his bravado and ruthlessness, he was still someone who had seen her at her lowest and stood beside her when no one else would have dared. They were two lone wolves with a bond built on mutual respect and survival. Tia accepted his calls from behind bars, her tone steady and unwavering as she reminded him of his strength and resilience. She refused to let him feel defeated, reassuring him that he'd find a way out, even though both of them knew the odds were slim. She told him stories of how things were on the outside, sharing rumors and inside information to make him feel connected to the world beyond prison walls. Tia encouraged him to fight his case, to keep hope alive, and subtly suggested that there were always ways to turn things around if he played his cards right. Each call was a brief lifeline for him, a few minutes to cling to the possibility of freedom. And Tia, determined as ever, made sure he believed that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way forward. Starling, ever the strategist, was already preparing for the worst. His trial hadn't even begun, but he was thinking ahead, talking to Tia about his plans to file an appeal if things went south. He trusted her more than anyone else outside his circle, knowing that she would have his back no matter what. When he mentioned the trial paperwork, saying it would be delivered to his girlfriend's house, Tia sensed the tension in his voice. Starling wasn't certain who he could trust anymore, and he wanted her to keep an eye on his girlfriend, just in case. Tia understood the stakes. With a life sentence on the line, loyalty was everything, and one slip-up could mean betrayal. She agreed to keep tabs, though part of her questioned whether Starling's girlfriend would hold up under pressure or if she'd end up a weak link. Starling promised to let her know exactly what to look for when the time came, specifics on who visited, what conversations she overheard, and anything that might hint at a betrayal. This wasn't the kind of favor Tia would do for just anyone, but for Starling, a man who'd offered her both respect and a lifeline when she'd needed it. She was willing to go all in. Tia's family looked as unassuming as any Southern family, grounded and close-knit, with the appearance of simplicity. At Penny's house, there was a comfort in the modest setting. Everyone kicked off their shoes, enjoyed home-cooked meals, and shared laughter around a cozy table. It was where they let down their guard, savoring those simple moments that reminded them of why they did what they did. But when they moved as a unit, a sophisticated Southern crime family, no one would suspect them. Tia, with her sharp mind and fierce loyalty, was the mastermind her brother Varnell brought his youthful energy, always ready to back her up. And Beau, her forever fiancé, stood steady beside her as both protector and confidant. Her lieutenant and best friend was her trusted right hand, while Penny, her young-spirited mother, gave the operation both warmth and wisdom. At her mini-mansion apartment overlooking Raleigh, Tia kept a different kind of headquarters, a space that showed the sharp contrast between the innocence they presented and the powerhouse they truly were. The panoramic view of the city reminded her of her reach, the intricate web of connections she had spun across Raleigh. They looked like everyday people, but together they formed an unstoppable force, bound by loyalty and a shared vision that only they could understand. Tia kept her private life fiercely guarded. Her home was her sanctuary, and she refused to let anyone inside its walls unless they were truly special or shared her roots from Rose Hill. To her, this boundary was sacred, a reminder of the simplicity and loyalty she valued most. Her top-floor duplex was reserved for family, trusted allies, and the rare few who had earned a place close to her heart. Tia's family was a force of nature, each generation refining the strengths and sass of the last. Tia was a fiercer, fiery version of Penny, with Zia following in their footsteps, learning to wield the same strength and wit. Their bond was filled with a playful tug-of-war, each woman fighting for control, but ultimately building each other up. Penny secretly took pride in how her girls had grown into beautiful, sharp, and strong women, knowing they carried her spirit into everything they did. Luxury was a way of life for Tia. Shopping sprees with Zia and her brother were regular outings where she reveled in finding the finest clothes and accessories. Penny always called in, chipping in or repaying Tia for never forgetting to bring her a little something special. They were a powerhouse family, wrapped in luxury and united by loyalty. Varnell carried himself with a confidence and style that drew attention wherever he went. Even though Tia frequently scolded him to keep him grounded, she held him on a pedestal, proud of the polished hustler he was becoming. Riding in the back of the pearl-white Lexus, his presence exuded quiet authority and class, a modern-day royalty in the making. He was her protégé, the one she had groomed with the respect and know-how of their world, ensuring he would be seen as a formidable, yet elusive, figure. Varnell thrived in Rose Hill, where he could be under his mother Penny's watchful eye while managing the family's marijuana empire and their crew. Tia had raised him to be sharp and savvy, and though he'd grown into a powerful figure in his own right, he still held that deep connection to his roots and his family. Under Penny's roof, he kept things running smoothly, blending his laid-back loyalty to family with a fierce dedication to their business, ensuring that the operation ran like a well-oiled machine. Penny cherished the times when Varnell stayed home, showering him with special dinners that brought a sense of warmth and tradition. After their meals, she'd head to her ice cream shop, a front for her own operation, where she and Beau kept the business alive. Penny's 25-year run was a testament to her resilience and grit, always understated, yet endlessly effective, a matriarch with a skillful hustle. Zia was the heart of the family, doted on by everyone, especially her uncle Varnell. He became the steady male presence in her life, filling the role of both older brother and father figure. Despite the whispers and judgments from her past, Tia poured her love and resilience into Zia, determined to give her a life free from the mistakes she'd made herself. She raised Zia with pride, never shying away from the sacrifices or challenges that came with being a young mother. Zia was more than just a daughter. She was Tia's legacy and her motivation to keep pushing forward. CS showed up at Don's condo in his sheriff's uniform, a subtle display of his double life as both law enforcement and an investor in the local real estate game. Don, still catching his breath from a tense past encounter with Solo, welcomed him in. Their conversation drifted to old times, especially the sticky situation with Solo out in the country. CS was visibly relieved to see Don doing well, particularly after the confusion around the drug money. Unbeknownst to CS, Don had actually split the profits with Solo, securing his own piece in the process. When CS mentioned his new venture in real estate and offered Don a spot in his duplex out in Durham County, Don saw the appeal. CS assured him that the place was private and perfect for his lifestyle, a step up from his condo while still far enough off the beaten path. Don accepted, and they set the move-in date for the following month, marking the start of a fresh chapter in familiar territory. But this time, with a few extra layers of caution. The new duplex was a perfect fit for Don's creative pursuits. With its expansive back deck and 2 staircases descending into a lush, forested area, it gave him a sense of privacy, backed by a line of fine-cut trees that acted as a natural barrier between him and the wealthier homes nearby. Don wasted no time transforming the space into a multimedia hub. His equipment, computers, and video setup found their places quickly, each piece essential to running his video magazine. He lined the walls with posters, covering them in an eclectic blend of past features, inspiring imagery, and a few nostalgic nods to the magazine's roots. His dining area took on a new role as a green screen room, providing the perfect backdrop for producing clips and segments that kept his audience hooked. For Don, this wasn't just a new home, it was a fresh stage for his work and a base for the network he'd built up over the years. Don's duplex townhome had a unique, split-level layout that added to its character and functionality. Upon entering, visitors were greeted by a mid-level landing with staircases extending both upward and downward. Heading up led to the second floor, where Don's production studio buzzed with creative energy, computers, equipment, and the green screen all set up to bring his video magazine to life. Going down, however, revealed the more private quarters, a comfortable bedroom, and a sleek bathroom, tucked away for relaxation and recharge. The setup was ideal, giving Don the perfect separation between work and home, each space tailored to its purpose. Big Gary's call brought a wave of curiosity and anticipation. Recently freed from the feds, he and the AME crew were back in action, and he was eager to meet with Don face-to-face. Big Gary had always been the digital backbone of Ace Money Entertainment, tirelessly managing their social media pages and keeping their online presence strong. Don could already imagine the updates and stories Gary would have to share. Big Gary walked into Don's place with a sense of relief, seeing it as a haven after the chaos they'd been through. Once inside, he shared the harrowing details, how the feds had descended on the studio that day, picking off each AM member one by one, escorting them to holding for questioning. It had been a calculated sweep, but in the end, Ace stepped up and took full responsibility for the charges, allowing the rest of the crew to walk free. Gary's gratitude was palpable, knowing the loyalty and sacrifice Ace had shown kept them all from facing lengthy sentences. For Big Gary, the ordeal underscored the importance of staying under the radar and out of trouble, at least until Ace's situation could be resolved. As Big Gary took in Don's place, he saw more than just a safe spot. It was a fresh opportunity. The setup, with its production studio and professional aura, represented a place where he could regroup and recalibrate his path forward. Under Don's wing, Big Gary saw a chance to not only stay out of trouble, but also to leverage Don's influence and guidance in the video magazine business. He knew Don's connections and creative insight could open doors he hadn't considered before, and being part of the magazine's network would give him a sense of protection and purpose he'd long needed. This was more than just a visit. It was an unspoken request to start fresh, to put his digital marketing skills to better use, and to make something meaningful in a new chapter with Don's steady mentorship. Don took Big Gary under his wing, giving him a fresh start within the video magazine business. Big Gary's testimony and loyalty had earned Don's trust, but the rift with Otis lingered like a dark cloud. Otis, still reeling from his brother Ace's absence, grew increasingly distrustful and erratic. His accusations against Big Gary for taking cash and drugs from their clubhouse apartment only added to the tension. Though Otis respected Don immensely, seeing him as a guide in a time of upheaval, he was lost without Ace, turning to alcohol and pills to cope. Don recognized Otis's pain, hoping he could eventually offer him the same sense of purpose he was providing to Big Gary. Otis showed up at Don's duplex, tension radiating off him as he demanded Big Gary join him outside. Without hesitation, Big Gary followed, his expression unreadable as he slipped into the back seat of Otis's car. Don watched as they drove off, a knot of worry settling in his stomach. Otis had made it clear this was about I.M.S. business, and Don could sense the unresolved tensions running deep. As they disappeared down the road, Don wondered if this confrontation might finally force a reckoning between them, or if it would pull Big Gary back into the storm he'd just escaped. An hour later, Don's phone rang, and Big Gary's panicked voice came through. He was furious, recounting how Otis had pulled a gun on him, threatening him to sever all ties with I.M.S. and dumping him out in a desolate area in East Durham. Don felt a surge of anger and disbelief. He couldn't fathom why Otis had taken things so far, letting his frustration and grief over Ace push him to such extremes. Relieved that Big Gary trusted he hadn't set him up, Don knew he had to do something to rein in Otis. This behavior jeopardized everything Don was building, and he couldn't allow Otis's spiral to drag them down. It was time to set boundaries and try to get through to Otis before he burned any more bridges. With Big Gary now by his side, Don found himself with a fierce ally who fully believed in his vision. Gary had become Don's right-hand man, motivating him to push forward and protect what they were building. As Don's muscle, Gary was not only there for support, but also as a force to be reckoned with, ensuring no one would cross Don lightly. The two were an unlikely but powerful team, each finding strength in the other as they navigated their next moves. Big Gary was out visiting his daughters and finalizing his own side hustle, selling the last of what he'd taken from the I.M.S. clubhouse. Meanwhile, Don's phone rang. Interrupting the silence, it was Ace calling on a three-way line from federal jail. Ace's voice crackled through, full of that smooth country charm he was known for. He reassured Don that he was mentally sharp and doing well, but his words were tinged with a fierce resolve. Ace launched into a spirited monologue, hyping his plans for a powerful return. Don tried to dig into the details of Ace's case, hoping for a clearer picture of the legal trouble he faced, but Ace dodged each question, insisting he was coming back stronger. Instead, he veered into talk of Starling, claiming the fallout with him had set off the Fed's attention and placed the blame squarely on Starling's shoulders. Ace's bitterness was unmistakable, and while he painted a picture of triumph, Don sensed an undertone of frustration and loss. He knew Ace was holding back something, but with the tension between him and Starling unresolved, the situation was messier than ever. Don's past gave him a sharp perspective on Ace's situation. He'd been there himself, knowing firsthand how relentless the feds could be. Ace's evasive answers set off alarms, especially considering the gravity of his charges. Heroin weight, a near guarantee of a life sentence if convicted. Don remembered his own nightmare caught with a half-kilo of cocaine, slapped with $1 million bond that had started at $500,000 and 8 long years behind bars. Ace, by contrast, hadn't mentioned a bond at all, a glaring red flag. As he pieced things together, a disturbing realization sank in. Either Ace had already agreed to cooperate, or he was weighing the option to turn informant. Don knew that once someone got in deep with the feds, survival instincts kicked in, often turning former allies into liabilities. He'd seen how easily loyalty could buckle under pressure, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Ace was on the brink of making a choice that would fracture the trust between them forever. Ace picked up on Don's hesitation, and his voice rose, defensive and almost accusing. He questioned why Don was so keen to publicize his case on the video magazine, clearly feeling cornered. But Don, calm and collected, countered with a point that stopped Ace in his tracks. He suggested that if Ace shared his story openly, Otis could use the publicity as fuel for his rap career, spinning the I.M.S. saga into a legend that would cement his credibility in the music world. Don emphasized how people would believe Otis. The streets knew he was Ace's little brother, and Otis's lyrics would carry weight, painting a vivid picture of I.M.S. control over North Carolina. The notoriety alone would elevate him, drawing in fans who would be captivated by the gritty truth and legacy he'd inherited. Don's words struck Ace, hinting at a chance to turn their situation into something powerful, but Ace's silence spoke volumes. He was caught between his own survival and the legacy his brother could build in his absence. Ace's voice softened, his tone shifting as he finally acknowledged Don's idea. He said he'd consider letting Don document his story and his involvement with SFS, a cryptic hint at the reach and complexity of his connections. There was a pause, a moment heavy with unspoken tension, before Ace ended the call. As the line went dead, Don sat back, feeling the weight of the offer Ace had just left hanging. He knew this story could either solidify I.M.S.' legacy or expose it to a level of scrutiny that could bring everything crashing down. The choice was now in Ace's hands, and Don had no idea what decision he'd ultimately make. Don sat for a moment, absorbing the weight of Delora's call. Starling reaching out, even through Delora, struck a chord. Their rocky history was known, yet Starling's message was clear. He was counting on Don to get through to Ace. The stakes were high, and Don knew firsthand the destruction that snitching could bring to a crew. As he thought about Starling's message, he realized the gravity of what was unfolding. If Ace folded under federal pressure, the entire I.M.S. network, and possibly Starling's organization, were at risk. And though Don was no stranger to betrayal, the idea of Ace, someone he once trusted, taking that route felt unforgivable. He was now torn between his loyalty to the truth and the chance to gain exclusive coverage of the most turbulent chapter in I.M.S. history. With Starling's call potentially coming soon, Don knew he was stepping deeper into a complicated web of loyalty, survival, and power. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a test of integrity, and Don was about to find out just how much it could cost. The call with Starling left Don with much to think about. Starling's confidence, even under federal watch, was striking. He clearly saw himself as the true power behind everything, not Ace or anyone else. His insistence that the feds had nothing solid on Ace showed he was not just confident, but unwavering, still playing his hand with conviction. Starling's invitation for Don to meet in person at the address he provided was intriguing. It was a chance to hear the whole story directly from the man who claimed the title of Kingpin. Starling's tone left little doubt that he viewed himself as the ultimate authority, the one capable of narrating the I.M.S. saga and how it all unraveled. He wanted Don to know that if anyone told the story, it should be him. Don felt a certain thrill. A door had opened to possibly the biggest exclusive of his career. But he also sensed the danger. Getting too close to a federal investigation, especially with someone as notorious as Starling, was risky. Yet Starling's respect, coupled with his own journalistic drive, pulled him toward the meeting. As Don jotted down the address, he prepared himself for the complex path ahead. It was a chance to capture a powerful narrative, but also a walk through a minefield of alliances, secrets, and hidden motives. He knew he'd have to tread carefully, balancing his loyalty, his career, and the dangerous game that was unfolding. Don felt a surge of adrenaline as he grabbed his camera, notebook, and pen, ready to document every detail of what could be the most defining story of his career. Dressed in his signature Kangol cap and long black trench coat, he cut a discreet yet determined figure, knowing this meeting was too significant to delay. He eased into the driver's seat of his old black Lincoln Town car, a vehicle that had seen countless interviews and late-night drives, and took a deep breath as he adjusted the rearview mirror. The streets were quiet as he made his way through the city, his mind replaying Starling's words. Every line was a reminder of the tangled alliances, of Ace's wavering loyalty, and the ominous reach of the federal investigation. Arriving at the address, Don found himself at an inconspicuous warehouse, tucked away on the outskirts of town. It had a nondescript exterior, just another rundown building to passersby, but to him, it was the gateway to a story that could expose or elevate him. He parked a distance away, taking a moment to scope out his surroundings. After ensuring the area was clear, he stepped out, camera slung over his shoulder, ready to capture whatever revelations awaited. With a deep breath, Don approached the warehouse door, feeling the weight of the secrets he was about to uncover. Don's mind raced as he scanned Ace's testimony in the blue binder, piecing together the carefully concealed details. The blacked-out sections, while intended to obscure information, revealed enough context clues for him to mentally fill in the blanks. Each redacted line became clear, and he recognized certain moments Ace recounted, having witnessed them himself. Delora sat silently across the table, observing Don's reaction as he studied each page with intense focus. He was struck by the weight of what he held. This testimony held the potential to shatter reputations and stir up trouble that couldn't be undone. It revealed Ace's deals with the feds, the compromises he was ready to make, and the dangerous alliances that had already been betrayed. The room was tense, and the sight of the towering boxes of paperwork around him brought home just how complex and entangled this federal case had become. Delora, a reluctant witness to it all, seemed to carry her own burden of regret, tangled up by her connection to Starling. Don closed the binder slowly, looking up at Delora. "This right here, it's bigger than just Ace or I.M.S. It's a whole operation waiting to unravel," he said quietly. Delora nodded, her expression heavy. "It's been hard watching Starling get pulled into all this, especially knowing Ace is willing to say whatever to protect himself." Don understood the unspoken message. This wasn't just about making headlines. It was about survival, loyalty, and the thin line they all walked. With one last look at the binder, he knew that whatever he did next, it would come with consequences that even his video magazine might not be able to contain. As the mysterious woman arrived in her Hummer, Don's mind lingered briefly on her intriguing presence, but he quickly shifted back to the task at hand. Delora, noticing his focus had returned, slid the blue binder across the table toward him. She said, leaning in, "Let's get real about what you can use." She tapped her fingers on the stack of paperwork, emphasizing the significance of each page. "If we're doing this, it has to be airtight, just the facts, but enough to keep everyone guessing. Starling's willing to go big, but you and I both know we need to walk a fine line." Don nodded, recognizing the high-stakes nature of their endeavor. They discussed potential angles, considering how much of the raw testimony to reveal and which events to focus on. Each document, each detail from the blue binder had to serve a purpose, shaping Starling's story without endangering anyone involved or inviting unnecessary federal scrutiny. Delora handed over copies of certain key documents, highlighting moments that could captivate viewers without crossing any dangerous lines. She knew Starling's case inside and out and guided Don on what would work best to build the narrative. As they wrapped up, Delora added, "Starling's life is on the line. This documentary isn't just for views. It's his last message, his legacy. He wants it raw, but we have to be smart. Don agreed. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also the thrill of telling a story that could shake the streets and captivate audiences. Together, they mapped out the documentary's outline, and Don left that night, determined to build something unforgettable from Starling's tale. The doorbell rang, with them both looking like a deer in headlights. Don asked Delora was she expecting anyone, and she said no. She walked past Don, switching in cut-off shorts, showing off her curvy physique, asking, "Who is it?" As she opened the door, and a lavish woman with a combat hat on a long lace front, with a ponytail down her back, a flawless string necklace of diamonds around her neck, tight jeans, and a set of Louis Vuitton rain jelly boots on. She came in introducing herself and immediately took control of the conversation, saying Starling sent her over to help out with the documentary. Delora and Don both looked confused because Don wasn't told anyone would be helping him with his expertise. He thought to himself, that damn Starling always crossing up someone. The lady offered Don to get some help from a friend of hers who owned the #1 gossip site Mingleberry in Charlotte to promote Starling's documentary, and it would give it some legs right away. She quickly called her girlfriend and gave Don the phone to speak to the Mingleberry rep. Don denied all advertising costs and charges and left his phone number, name, and email info with the Mingleberry rep and hung up. The designer street-dressed woman said, "Well, okay, seems as if her job was done," and skipped out into her H3 Hummer Sport, reversed, and was gone. Don caught a glimpse of her from behind, and the thought of how he would keep woman of her status interested in him in the past when he was in the life. The thought of lust came and left seconds. As the H3 Hummer disappeared down the street, Don stood at the doorway, a mix of confusion and intrigue lingering in his mind. The encounter had felt like a whirlwind, leaving him and Delora momentarily dazed by the stranger's bold energy. Her unexpected arrival, the quick mention of Mingleberry, and her instant command of the situation made Don wonder if Starling had set this up as a test, pushing him to confront unexpected players. Delora, sensing his thoughts, let out a sigh. "Starling's got his own ways, doesn't he?" she said, closing the door and turning back to Don. "You think we should even consider that Mingleberry angle?" Don shrugged, still processing everything. "Maybe, but on our terms," he replied, his voice steady. "I don't want to hand this over to anyone who'll sensationalize it. We'll need eyes, sure, but not at the cost of control." Delora nodded, seeing the determination in Don's gaze. "Good call. I'd hate to see it turned into just another headline for people to scroll past." As they returned to the dining room, they both felt the weight of Starling's world, its influence stretching far beyond the case files and testimony. Whatever direction they took, Don knew they had to protect the story's integrity, even if it meant brushing off anyone else Starling might try to throw into the mix. Back at Don's studio, he worked diligently on the documentary, reading page after page of the court minutes Delora gave him, and the phone ranged. It was an unfamiliar, sweet countrywoman's voice on the other end. Dom kept asking who it was, and the voice said, "Mingleberry." Don paused, gripping the phone tighter as the voice on the other end repeated, "It's Mingleberry." The sweet southern twang held a certain charm, but it was also persistent, cutting through his confusion. "I'm Callie Ray," the voice continued. "I just wanted to touch base about that documentary Starling's lady mentioned. I think we can work together to make this huge." Don hesitated, cautious of yet another unsolicited partner muscling into his project. "Listen, Callie Ray," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I appreciate the enthusiasm, but I'm handling the content in-house. This isn't some quick-click story." There was a pause, then Callie Ray's voice softened. "I respect that, Don. I've been around enough stories to know when someone's in it for more than just the clicks. But if you ever need reach, real, meaningful reach, just know that Mingleberry is here. This story deserves to be seen." Don didn't answer immediately. He could sense Callie Ray was genuine, but he wasn't sure how much he could trust any new players. "All right, Callie, I'll keep that in mind," he said, still guarded. As he hung up, he went back to the court documents, but Callie Ray's voice lingered in his mind. He'd been careful in crafting this documentary, knowing it had to be more than a headline. Still, the idea of a wider platform tempted him if he could control how it was used. She laughed as she introduced herself as Tia. Tia told Don she just wanted to see if she had it any longer, and her proof that she had her game tight was that she used Mingleberry concept to get his personal number and info out of him. Don and Tia had stayed on the phone all night, talking until the first light of dawn. When he finally woke up that afternoon, Big Gary was at his door. As soon as he let him in, Don filled him in on everything that had happened, meeting Tia, the court transcripts, his conversation with Starling, and the surprising reconnection with Delora, the model from New Jersey he'd met 5 years ago. Big Gary listened intently, picking up on Don's excitement over the developments. The two of them began discussing the potential angles for the documentary, considering how Tia and Delora might play into the story they wanted to tell. Big Gary's enthusiasm was infectious as he laid out a vision for Don, painting a picture of what the magazine could become. He saw this documentary as the dawn of a new regime, a movement that could rival the influence AME or SFS once had. With this story, Big Gary imagined the entire state of North Carolina crowning Don as a legitimate kingpin, one who wielded power legally and influentially. The magazine, in Big Gary's eyes, was Don's ticket to transforming himself into a local celebrity and beyond. He spoke of Don making club appearances, gaining national distribution, and building a massive fan base. And as Big Gary spoke, his ambitions grew bolder, predicting that Don's newfound status would even attract Starling's women, including Tia and Delora, who would eventually flock to him. Don listened, half amused and half mesmerized by Big Gary's grand vision. The thought of this kind of power and influence was tempting, and he couldn't deny that the magazine and this documentary could very well be his golden ticket to recognition and respect. But he also understood the stakes, knowing that with fame and influence came new rivals, challenges, and responsibilities. Big Gary, unfazed by the prospect of new rivalries, was locked onto a single vision, resurrecting the influence and power once held by AME, but this time under Don's control. He saw the magazine as more than just a media outlet. It was an opportunity to create a new legacy, one that would cast a shadow even larger than Starling's or Ace's. To him, Don's story could be the spark that gripped not only North Carolina, but the entire country. Pushing Don with relentless enthusiasm, Big Gary urged him to seize this moment and take over entirely. Forget what AME was. This is bigger, he pressed, his eyes alive with ambition. He saw the potential for Don to become a symbol, a force that people across the nation could rally behind, admire, and fear. And while Don knew that stepping into the spotlight would come with its dangers, Big Gary's conviction made the idea hard to resist. He could take their light, and with the magazine as his platform, cast his own shadow over the game. Don carefully chose something understated yet sharp from his closet, perfect for his meetup with Tia tonight. He knew he wanted to make an impression that matched his quiet strength and subtle influence, staying true to his style. Don embodied a low-key, strategic approach to his influence, preferring to move in silence and let his impact resonate through others and the powerful brand of his magazine. He believed that actions spoke louder than words, trusting his network and reputation to carry his message without needing to be in the spotlight himself. Don arrived at the luxury high-rise in Raleigh, following Tia's text to the sky-level platform. The elevator ride felt endless as he rose to the top, imagining what awaited him. Stepping out onto the sky level, he found himself in an open-air setting, a concrete slab suspended high above the city, surrounded by safety barriers, but with a clear view of Raleigh's skyline. The ambiance was surreal, a mix of urban sophistication and raw exposure to the elements, with the night lights of the city twinkling below. There she stood, exuding a radiant, almost ethereal glow, with skin that seemed to catch every shimmer of the city lights. Her long lashes brushed her cheeks with every blink beneath the sleek lace front. Diamonds adorned her like stars, hanging effortlessly around her neck, wrist, and ears, pure, uncut stones that sparkled without a setting. She tilted her head, offering a soft, tender smile that quickly twisted into a sharp, streetwise grin. "What's up, Dawn?" she purred, her voice a mix of sweetness and edge, carrying just enough bite to let him know she was both goddess and hustler. Dawn and Tia slipped into conversation seamlessly, each word carefully chosen by Dawn. He knew the power of his past, a former Dawn who once commanded respect and fear. Prison had changed him, made him cautious and reserved, pulling back his former grandeur to embrace a quieter strength. But Tia felt it, his presence, the energy he carried, even in his muted form. She watched him intently, sizing him up, already seeing potential. Tia's eyes glimmered with intrigue. She knew he had something she wanted to bring to the surface. Whether he needed a makeover or a push to reclaim his edge, she wasn't sure, but she liked him immediately. She had her own plans. She could feel the wheels turning, and Don, with his quiet confidence, would be key to them. Don eased into the plush leather couch, taking in the opulent surroundings. Tia's high-rise apartment was a sanctuary of luxury, filled with high-end leather furniture and curated art that exuded sophistication. Every detail felt deliberate, from the sleek lines of the furniture to the oversized movie screen that partially draped over the entrance to the balcony, hinting at the breathtaking view beyond. As he settled in, Don felt a rare sense of comfort, as though the room was wrapping him in its warmth. It was a feeling he hadn't had in years, maybe ever. He caught himself letting his guard down, his usual vigilance slipping as he soaked in the elegance around him. Tia moved gracefully through the room, bringing a sense of ease and intention, as if she designed the space not just to impress, but to invite people into her world. This wasn't just a home, it was a statement, a testament to her ambition, her taste, her control. And now as Don sat back, he knew he was a part of her plans. Tia moved with purpose, her white Egyptian silk gown flowing gracefully as she poured 2 glasses of champagne. The gown's gold trimmings shimmered in the soft light, a perfect match for the sparkle in her eyes. She crossed the room, holding the glasses with a confident smile, as if she already knew the effect her presence was having on Don. Handing him a glass, she raised her own in a toast, her gaze holding his. "To new beginnings, Don," she said, her voice warm yet charged with a hint of mystery. As they clinked glasses, he felt a renewed sense of his old power, as if the world he once commanded was slowly returning, piece by piece, with each minute he spent in her company. Don took a slow sip, feeling the champagne's warmth settle over him. In Tia's world, he felt elevated, like the man he'd once been, but polished, refined. It was more than a celebration. It was a revival, a step toward the life he thought he'd left behind, now tempting him to dive back in. Tia's demeanor shifted effortlessly as she returned with 2 glittering Jacob the Jeweler diamond watches, each piece exuding an undeniable luxury and weight that caught Don's eye. Her sweetness transformed into a commanding presence, like a lioness asserting her territory, yet inviting him to be part of it. She held out one of the watches, her gaze steady and assessing. "So, Don," she said, her voice both alluring and edged with authority, "I'm about legacy and real money. I move with purpose. Tell me, what are you about?" The question hung in the air, her tone making it clear that her interest was conditional, based on whether he could match her ambition and drive. Don recognized her test, a moment of power dynamics at play. This wasn't just a question, it was a challenge, a gateway to something far beyond a single encounter. Tia reemerged with a hefty, overflowing garbage bag packed with vacuum-sealed pounds of vibrant, top-shelf marijuana strains, the kind that the South prized as its finest. The distinct, potent aroma drifted through the room, cutting through the champagne's light fragrance and filling the space with an undeniable intensity. Tia's eyes glinted as she held up the bag, casually, as if weighing the value in her own hands. "Or," she continued smoothly, "are you about this?" The room seemed to tighten as Don took in the sight, his throat instantly going dry. This wasn't just a display of her wealth or her access, it was a revelation of power, and she was offering him a glimpse into her world, one that was far more complex and high stakes than even he'd anticipated. His mind raced, carefully weighing his response, knowing whatever he said next could redefine their relationship entirely. In that electric moment, Tia pulled Don closer, her gaze intense and unguarded as she straddled him, wrapping him in a web of both power and seduction. She was a vision, exuding confidence and allure, and for Don, the entire scene felt like stepping into a world that once existed only in his loftiest ambitions. This was the kind of opportunity that could solidify his position, not just as a player, but as a true force, a kingpin among kingpins. Driven by that thought, he leaned into the moment with unbridled passion, pouring his energy and desire into her, losing himself in the intensity of her embrace. Together, they reached a high that felt limitless, a surge of emotion and connection as Tia gave herself over to the sensation, swept away by a fierce euphoria that brought her to new heights. When it was over, the silence in the room was thick with significance, and the possibilities between them felt boundless. Tia looked at Don, her expression softened but resolute. The night had solidified more than attraction. It had laid the foundation for something much deeper, an unspoken pact that could shape the future for both of them. For Don, this wasn't just a lucky night, it was the ultimate win. Tia, a woman known for her strength and guarded heart, hadn't allowed a man this close since her first love, Sugar Boy, whose memory lingered over her like a shadow. He'd been her everything, her protector and her guilty pleasure. Since his tragic death, she'd held her heart close, allowing no man even a fraction of that intimacy. Now Don found himself in rare territory. He knew how fiercely Tia had kept her guard up, how no man had managed to break through the layers she'd built over a decade. But here he was, sitting beside her, feeling as though he'd unlocked a piece of her that had long been hidden. He felt a surge of pride and gratitude. He had earned her trust, and in the process, he sensed an opportunity beyond anything he'd envisioned. As Tia reclined beside him, she seemed softer, her usual steely resolve tempered with a vulnerability that few, if any, had ever seen. In this moment, Don recognized his own good fortune. He wasn't just another man in her life. He was the one who'd reached her, the one who had touched the part of her that Sugar Boy had once held. As Don navigated the empty streets in his old black Lincoln, his mind churned with questions and a hint of paranoia. The quiet whir of the city at night made his thoughts race faster. He couldn't shake the feeling that getting close to Tia had somehow put him under a brighter, more dangerous spotlight. The federal indictment looming in the back of his mind felt like a shadow following him. He considered Tia's sudden presence, radiant, seductive, and undeniably powerful. Starling had placed her in his path, just as he had with Delora, each step seemingly orchestrated with a precision that left Don questioning his own moves. What was Starling's true play? And why bring someone like Tia into the picture now, just as Don was piecing together the documentary and unraveling Ace's questionable loyalties? As he pushed deeper into the night, he wondered if Tia was more than just a connection or a muse. Maybe she was the key that would elevate him above everything he'd ever imagined, or perhaps the tether that could pull him under if he didn't keep his wits sharp. As Don tightened his grip on the steering wheel, the weight of Tia's words lingered. Her tone had been steady, confident, almost teasing, and he couldn't tell if she was challenging him or offering him a lifeline. "You're scared?" It echoed in his mind, a reminder that Tia saw through any front he put up. He let her question hang in the air, frowning as he scanned the road for anything suspicious. Don had told her he was never scared, but he knew this game was different from his past runs. Tia's world was laced with diamonds, luxury, and connections so deep they could pull him into an entirely different league, or drown him. After finally reaching home and slipping his Lincoln into the shadows of his driveway, he shut the engine off and exhaled. Tia's influence was undeniable, but he'd have to figure out what she truly wanted and whether he could outmaneuver anyone standing in his way. To be continued.